Welcome back to the ongoing coverage and analysis of Dune Awakening. It's been a while. It's good to see everybody again. Did you change your hair? It looks fantastic. About a month ago, Funcom hosted an event in Norway that allowed a select few to come and test the game out and enjoy a version of the beta that they got to then write about and share footage from. And then the internet was bombarded with countless videos from people who had really never covered Dune Awakening, and suddenly I felt like I was a little bit left in the lurch. But needless to say, I'm back in action, and we are going to continue with the coverage of this game, starting with the Beauty of Arrakis video, and then we're going to cover the more exciting release date trailer that Funcom put out. Let's take a look at the various biomes that they have shown us from the game. Here we get a glimpse at Hagga Basin South. This is the starting area of the game where you will be joining other new players and getting your footing. You can see some recognizable rock structures in the background. That big hammer-shaped one looks like it's going to be a landmark to be recognized, and a better look at the giant spaceships that are going to be flying overhead on Arrakis. We get some higher detail looks at some of the plant life and the desert environment, as well as some great looks at the topography and the landscape, the rock formations, and some of these human-carved structures in the rocks. The verticality is on display here. We actually got quite a bit of footage of a location known as the Udham, or Odheim, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's denoted by these very alien-looking cacti plants that you'll see all over the place. Some cool footage of people constructing an ornithopter here, and generally it's got this very sort of Utah, Nevada look. Then we get to see what is pretty clearly evidence of a buggy with a skin on it, or some kind of coloration option. Then once again in the Udheim we see an ornithopter flying through, and we can see the wings shut off for a brief second. I think this is evidence of the either vulture mode or that signature ornithopter dive maneuver that we see in the Dune movies. We then get a look at a location known as the Vermilius Gap, and we've seen this in the earlier footage. This is going to be the location just north of the Hagga Basin South. So assuming you're moving north through the map, this is probably going to be the second location you'll encounter. Vermilius is in relation to vermilion, which is a color that has a reddish hue. You can see that signified by the reddish sand. So I think anytime you're seeing this red sand color, probably safe bet that you're in the Vermilius area. But then we do get to see our first look at Arrakeen officially. Now, we had hypothesized that this was Arrakeen in an earlier screenshot that they had released, and it looks like with the Atreides banner in the background, that's exactly what we're seeing here. So we get a more in-depth look at what Arrakeen is going to feel like, and it does kind of have that reminiscent feel from the Dune movies. Here we can actually see the famous 10 palm trees in the foyer of Arrakeen, and it looks like a really interesting place to hang out and explore. Again, this is going to be one of the social hubs in the game, along with Harco Village, which we did get to see a little bit of in the previous trailers. Then moving through this location, which looks like some sort of enemy encampment or an outpost. It could just be a place to get away from the sun for a bit. But then we see some various plant life and flowers growing in the center here. As we know, you can drink from the flowers, so this might just be a nice place to cool off for a little bit. There are those flowers again, and then a magnificent looking spice blow with some ornithopters flying overhead. And then we get our first real glimpse at the sand crawlers, the spice harvesters, moving across the desert at night towards what looks like 3 separate spice blows. So that should give you some indication of what the later game spice harvesting will look like. Then we see a location known as the Hagga Rift. We've talked about this before. I want you to pay attention to this land bridge going over top here. In this separate piece of footage, we do see those same land bridges going over top these very deep crevices. The Hagga Rift is a very vertically deep location. You will have to traverse downward into the depths where the sun barely reaches. As we've seen in commentary, you will be advised to bring a flashlight with you. We see an ornithopter here diving down into the depths, and then we get a glimpse at these glowing pinkish rock resource looking materials. They're dotted all over the walls of this place, so safe to say that's probably some sort of resource we're going to be mining specifically in that area. We get another glimpse of Arrakis at night here with this mysterious building in the front and that hammer-shaped rock in the background. Then we go back to the Vermilius Gap here with this ornithopter flying towards this strange, misty environment. Not sure exactly what that is, but it could be some sort of environmental hazard.
During the playtest now, I've been talking with a lot of people. Generally, it's the world, the atmosphere, the vibe of the game that people really, they really vibe with it. We had a long discussion at dinner last night about the Sandworm. I just think people really love that feeling of like being chased by this giant force of nature.
Getting to see the sandworm traverse around the map and watching the sand get kicked up is just really awesome to look at. We've seen in some of the beta playtest footage from the press releases, this worm is an AI that's going to be traveling around the map and sort of leaving trails of sand kicking up everywhere, and it's very intimidating looking. Here we see some active gunplay in action. It looks very snappy and fun. I think the gunplay in this game does look like a good time. I can't wait to get my hands on the weapons that this game has to offer. We get a few glimpses here of raw gameplay footage, walking around the map, exploring, hiding in the shadows. Harvesting resources, playing alongside your friends. It really gives you a better idea of how this game is going to feel when you're actually in the world.
I really like the process of layering in story in a world. There are locations in the game that are called specific things. All of those names are tied to a piece of like writing or lore that we've done in the background. It's not necessarily surfaced to the player in the game. But then in another part of the same area, you might find an item, and that item shares a name with a location. And the description on that item might describe what happened at that location for this item to be created. And it kind of creates this feeling that this world is lived in, that people have been here before, that there's more going on than just your story, that the world itself has a story.
Here we see some good footage of Ecolab gameplay, running around using your abilities like the shield wall, fighting against enemies. We then see a glimpse of the inventory screen, and in the top right there you can actually see what's called a makeshift hood. So in addition to the Mala armor set, there is a makeshift armor set. Then we get a couple shots of some environmental hazards on Arrakis, the sunstroke and dehydration mechanics here, and quicksand here. Clearly you're going to want to be looking out for that while walking around.
Firstly, there is Dune. Some people know the IP well, and some don't. Some have seen the movie, but never read the book. Some have read the book 72 times. And so we have a challenge. Most survival games have this ability to lean into a player's sense of intuition, where we have to kind of find these survival loops and make them work and give them proper explanation in our lore.
We then get to see, finally, some raw gameplay with the sandstorm mechanics in the game. And you can see here, it's this sprawling cloud of sand and dust that's going to be moving over the landscape, slowly billowing across the map. It looks very imposing. You definitely don't want to get caught out in the middle of this thing. It's said to be able to rip the player's HP down and even damage vehicles. So you're definitely going to want to find a safe space to hide in while these sandstorms crawl across the map. You don't want to be caught outside. It's going to do great damage to your equipment and vehicles. I did borrow some footage from IGN, so credit to them. I didn't feel it appropriate to take footage from streamers that had played the beta test, but IGN being a publication, I found it okay to use their footage temporarily. Here we see a player getting eaten by a sandworm, and it does look a little bit janky still, but it is a beta, so we do have to give them some slack on that. We then see some hair options in the character creation, as well as some group gunplay with an enemy camp, it looks like here. So grouping up with your friends is going to be a pretty fun activity to engage in to take down these enemy encampments. Here we actually get to see the Bene Gesserit skills on display for the first time. What we're seeing here is the voice pull, as indicated by the tiny man being inhaled. It seems that you pull the enemy towards you for a brief period, and then they end up stun locked for a little bit. Definitely going to be effective for PvE, as well as PvP, I can imagine. We're then treated to some raw melee combat, and you can say what you want about it, but I don't think this looks bad at all. I don't think anybody really knows what they want out of a third-person melee game, but to me this looks perfectly serviceable. Then we get to see some armor crafting with an armor set known as the Scavenger Stillsuit. So this is maybe I think our first look at a stillsuit being crafted. You have to craft it in pieces, so it looks like you have to make all the individual parts separately in order to equip those and wear that. Then we see a little bit of raw base building footage here. The player is moving around within that visible building area that they have and placing and destroying various pieces of the building set. So that should give you a good feel of what building bases is going to be like in Dune Awakening. We then see a solo player dealing with some enemies here, using the abilities and taking on the environment by themselves. So if you're a solo player, you should feel confident to attack these camps by yourself if you're leveled up properly. The player here doesn't have a shield, which is important to note. They are taking quite a bit of gunfire, but it doesn't seem to be doing too much damage to them. So if you're leveled up appropriately, you should be able to handle these enemies without too much trouble, at least in the starting areas of the game. A little bit of jank here getting into the Ornithopter, but again, it's still beta and we have to make allowances for these types of minor glitches. We then come to a location known as the Shield Wall, which we know from the lore is the higher mantelpiece that blocks the rest of the Hagga Basin area from the deep desert and the larger sandworms. We see this outpost here. It's safe to say this isn't a player base, as there are stationed NPCs at this location, so this must be one of the official faction bases that we'll get to interact with. I think my favorite part from all the recently released footage is how much actual cutscene footage we got to see. Some really nice official cinematics, and while I don't believe the player is going to be able to do moves like this in actual combat, we do get to see our first look at a new melee weapon right there. This sharp little bugger looks like it's going to do some serious damage, so I can't wait to get my hands on that one. That might be a favorite. A lot of turbulent ornithopter footage, people being shot down by rocket launchers, and then this piece of footage I found really interesting. We get to see our old pal the Sardaukar here from the earlier footage released last year, and it looks like he means business. Then we get a glimpse at this character who seems to be an important part of the story here, and it's reminiscent of this guy that we saw in the armor video I released earlier on my channel. These two characters get involved in a brief melee skirmish, which looks really awesome, honestly. I can't wait to see more of the cinematic cutscene footage from this game. It looks like they did a really good job with that. We see Muad'dib here hiding from a crashing spaceship, which apparently is going to be the spaceship the player crash lands on Arrakis with, as we then see your player crawling out of the wreckage. A bit more insight on what we can only assume is the Trials of Ackle spice-induced vision quests that you're going to be going on. We don't know the nature of these quests quite yet, but we can assume that these are what the player is going to have to do to get closer to the truth of what's going on Arrakis. We see a Reverend Mother with bleeding eyes, and even more terrifyingly, we see this horrifying nightmare version of Muad'dib, who is maybe speaking to you in this spice-induced vision that you're having, but my god, did they have to make him look like a Five Nights at Freddy character? That's just terrifying. The Trials of Ackle seem to be these sort of otherworldly, out-of-body experiences that the player has to engage in to complete some sort of challenge, presumably, in order to progress in the storyline. So we can't wait to see what those have in store for us. Then we get to see some footage of the player driving through Arrakis at night towards what is obviously a Harkonnen outpost. So now we've seen officially an Atreides base and a Harkonnen base. So those are going to be the two faction houses you'll be able to interact with and gain experience with. Exploring the dunes with your friends, engaging in some large player missions to go harvest spice, fly around, complete these resource gathering side quests, take on enemy camps. Pay attention to this player's chest piece on the right side. They seem to have these little tassels that flow in the wind. That's going to be really cool to see if that's part of the armor. Also, this player wearing a sort of a face mask and using a weapon that we haven't seen before. It looks like an awesome weapon to use, and it even seems to break right through shields and take out enemies that are fully shielded. Bullets flying everywhere, people using the flying knee, ornithopters taking out people with rockets. And then we get to see a player throwing a grenade that expands into this big green bubble. I think it's the same bubble from the DLSS video that we saw earlier. It sends the players floating, so I think it's safe to say this is the famous Suspensor grenade. Then we get to see what I think is the Swordmaster deflect ability. We see the player sort of fending off incoming gunfire with their sword here, so that's interesting. And then what I think is one of the juicier pieces of footage, we see these sort of endgame armor sets, what I can only assume is WORMSCALE armor there, and then the guy on the left just looks awesome. I don't know what armor that could be, but that looks great. But yeah, I just want to reiterate, WORMSCALE armor. We move on to a shot here of a player entering what looks to be the same area that we saw in the earlier footage with this petrified worm hanging over this enemy base. I had made a bet that this was the Mascaret that we've heard so much about. We do see the player looking up with emerald green eyes, and then we see those eyes have turned into the famous eyes of Ibad. We end up with this breathtaking shot of pretty much everything Dune Awakening has to offer. Sandstorms, spice blows, sandworms, endgame bases with giant banners, ornithopters flying everywhere, sandcrawlers going out into the deep desert. It looks incredible. The best part is we got the release date, everybody, May 20th this year, just a few short months away. Cannot wait. I'm sure you're excited as well. Thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying the channel. Make sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know what you're most excited for with Dune Awakening. We will catch you in the next one. Until then, keep it locked. Peace.